Well, welcome to Voices of Women. I'm your host, Chris Stanis, and I'm also the founder of Women of Wisdom Foundation, which has been putting on some fabulous conferences since 1993 in Seattle, Washington. We are headed into our 29th year, a very different year for 2021, as we will be doing a virtual conference for the very first time, which we're excited about because we're going to be bringing women together from all over the country, and hopefully even some people from around the world will join us because it is online. It's going to be just as experiential as we always do and just as impactful and changes women's lives. So the dates are March 11th to the 14th. Our theme this year is Celebrating Spirit of Women, United We Are One. And we have special guests this year of Terry Tempest Williams and Louisa Tisch. Today I'm interviewing one of our new presenters, Dr. Robyn Gobin, and she is going to be presenting a workshop, The Self-Care Prescription, Powerful Solutions to Manage Stress, this is the name of her book, Reduce Anxiety and Increase Well-Being, but that's what she's going to do on her workshop. So Dr. Robyn is a licensed clinical psychologist, author, educator, meditation teacher, sought-after speaker and workshop leader, and podcaster who is passionate about helping women actively and unapologetically care for themselves. She has dedicated her life to helping women reach their full potential and create the lives they desire. She is a nationally recognized expert on interpersonal trauma and women's mental health. She has over a decade of experience as a trauma therapist, supporting survivors to reclaim their mental health. I already gave you the name of her book. Her work has been featured in the national publications like Essence Magazine and Woman's World Magazine. And she's been recognized for her contributions to the mental health field by the American Psychological Association. And so, yeah, she's going to be giving a workshop at WOW on Saturday, March the 13th, Self-Care Prescriptions, Living Your One Life Well, which we all desire to do. So welcome, Robyn.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I'm excited.
Yes, well, we're excited to have you. Let's tell a little bit about yourself, how you got into this field of self-care. I mean, because you are a assistant professor or something in university level
Yeah.
teacher.
Yeah. So I'm a university teacher and also a therapist too. And so just, wearing those two hats, there's a lot to juggle. And so I really got into self-care from my own experience of recognizing that, when we as women are juggling a lot of times we put our own care on the back burner because we're
Mhm.
compassionate, we're nurturers, we want to take care of everyone around us. And so I soon kind of realized after trying to juggle all of these things that I'm passionate about, that it's so important for me to also take care of myself so that I don't get burnt out. And so that's what really brought me to this world of writing about self-care. But first of all, just learning how to implement and practice self-care in my own life, which is a struggle because again, we as women, multi-passionate women, we want to do a lot of things. We have a lot of energy. But if we're not careful, our health and our own wellness can take a hit while we're taking care of everyone else. And so I'm just passionate about helping other people find sustainable and effective ways to make self-care work for them.
And I think you have a line that says, you're not just talking about, well, let's take a bath. Let's go to the spa.
Right.
You're talking about some more deeper work.
Definitely, definitely. When we think about self-care, I want to be encouraging people to do things that are really going to nourish them at a soul level. So it's not just about getting your nails done, which definitely I have nothing against a pedicure or manicure. I love a good manicure and a good pedicure. But sometimes self-care requires a little bit us to go a little bit deeper, right? Sometimes it requires us to make that doctor's appointment that we've been putting off because we fear what the doctor is going to say, or it requires us to have that tough conversation with the family member that we've been putting off for years. So sometimes it's deeper things, or saying no to a terrific opportunity because our plate is already too full and we need to be spending more time with our family, right? So those aspects of self-care are a little bit deeper and a bit more challenging. And so that's what I enjoy helping people to navigate through and helping people to see the wide range of self-care. In my book, I talk about 6 different types or domains of self-care. And so it's really about seeing yourself holistically and understanding that in addition to like your physical needs for like sleep and food, you also have spiritual needs and you have emotional needs and you have social needs, and making sure that we're not neglecting any one part of our makeup or our needs in the service of another. And so just making sure that we have attention um, spread out to really be able to see what do I need in the various domains of my life and how can I go about tending to those needs in a way that, like you said in my bio, is unapologetic. Because I think another challenge that I run into with women in particular talking about self-care is that feeling of guilt and feeling like, we have so many other responsibilities, we have so many other people depending on us, and we just couldn't possibly take 30 minutes for ourselves, or we couldn't possibly invest money in our own selves because our children need that money, or our children need the time, or our partners need that time, or family members. And so it's really about getting into this habit and getting into this practice so that you can not only take care of yourself but not be waiting for other people to give you permission to do it, or constantly be apologizing for taking care of yourself.
Yeah, so it's that old saying of, you put your mask on in a plane first, or you can't help your child. You know,
Yep, exactly.
not
You won't
time to.
yeah, you won't be any good to anyone
Mm.
else if you don't take care of yourself. And that's what I always, and I like to use this analogy when I'm speaking with women about, a lot of us have hosted before. We enjoy hosting, having people over to our homes. And so if you think about hosting, if, the holidays are coming up and if you're having someone over, probably not, maybe not because of COVID, but in prior years when we
Mhm.
could, roam and travel freely, if you're having someone to come over for dinner, you would likely make them a fresh meal, right? You wouldn't give them the 2-week-old spaghetti that you have in the back of the fridge that you might kind of go to as a last resort for yourself if you don't feel like cooking, but you wouldn't give that to someone else. And so it's the same thing with us. We have to be thinking about what version of ourselves are we giving the people who we love and the people who we care about. Are we giving them the leftovers, the whatever's left over after our job has had us, after all the other demands have kind of taken their toll on us? Or are we giving them the best version of ourselves, the freshest version, a kind of recharged, revitalized version of ourselves because we have poured into ourselves? And so that's what I think about when I think about that mask analogy, is like we have to put the oxygen mask on ourselves and take care of ourselves so that we can show up to the best of our ability for our families and for our loved ones.
Yeah, and I'm thinking even like don't serve yourself that 2-week-old spaghetti in your fridge, treat yourself
Exactly.
to that good meal. Um,
Exactly.
so there's something about getting clear, having helping women to get clear about their values.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really important because when we talk about self-care, there's so many ideas out in the world about what self-care is, what you're supposed to do for self-care. And there really is no right or wrong way to take care of yourself. It's really about tuning in, taking a moment to get still, to quiet the outside noise, whether that requires taking a social media break or turning off the emails, the work emails, so you can really kind of get clear and take some quiet moments to yourself and say, okay, what do I really need? What is the most compassionate thing that I can offer myself in that moment? And that requires, again, that stillness. And also it requires some patience and willingness to wait and hear what our intuition and what our inner wisdom has to say about what we need. And then once we receive that message, the next step is the courage to actually offer ourselves whatever we have known that we need. And so it really does start with this kind of attunement to yourself and your own needs and really understanding what you need. And for a lot of people, this is not an easy thing because again we're not used to being quiet with ourselves. We constantly have a TV on, or we're have a podcast on in the background, or we're on our phones, or we're talking to someone in our household. And so sometimes it really is a uncomfortable experience to just get quiet and get silent and sit with yourself. But what I've learned is that the more practice you give yourself doing that and taking care of yourself and tuning into what you need, the easier it becomes to really kind of decipher what is it that I need and what is it that I want. Because self-care is also not just about your needs, but about your wants, right? We only get one life, and how do you want to be leading that life? What is your definition of success? How do you want to be spending your days? And a lot of times in this society, we get fed other people's desires for us. And because we're people pleasers, a lot of times we go along that path and we spend our lives chasing goals that don't really align with our true values or our true purpose. And so it's really about kind of getting clear about what's important to me and being okay if that doesn't align with what popular culture or what even your family says you should be as far as like your career or as far as having children or whatever the goal is. You have to be good with you at the end of the day because you're the only one that goes to sleep with you. And so really just being clear about what is it that I want from my life and how can I passionately pursue that in a way that really honors my values and what I think is important in life.
Yes, and that we're so trained to be busy. Just we're supposed to be productive. We're supposed to be busy, or we're feeling guilty for if we're not. And in order to get to that clarity, like you said, is getting that place of stillness and silence and listening to yourself and feeling it in your body, I would imagine. So, what I would imagine that you have worked with many women and have learned about what the challenges that get in their way.
Yeah, definitely. The number one challenge that I hear is guilt, right? The number one thing I hear is guilt. It's like I feel guilty whenever I take some time. And sometimes it's guilt that is maybe self imposed, like no one is giving them feedback, but they just feel bad because they feel like there's so many other things they could be investing in. But then other times, people have gotten negative reactions from people in their family, right? They go take a break and then their partner is like, what are you doing? We got these kids here that need to be taken care of. And so a lot of times the whether it's kind of generated from inside or from outside, there's that guilt. And so that really gets in the way for a lot of women. Another thing that I've heard of is this feeling like you should be able to handle it all. You should be able to be
Mhm.
strong. And so that gets in the way, not wanting to show any sign of weakness or wanting to show any sign that you can't handle it. And so sometimes self care looks like asking for help. But if you have this kind of deep seated belief that you should be able to handle everything in this kind of American standard of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and independence and you don't need anyone, then that can be a huge barrier that gets in the way for a lot of women. And then other folks I found just don't really know what true self-care is. They've seen in the magazines, when self-care is talked about, is there's pictures of these lavish vacations or pictures of going to the day spa. And so they kind of feel like, well, that's not really attainable for me, that doesn't really work for my life. And so it's really about kind of helping people expand their conceptualizations and their mindsets about what self-care can look like, because sometimes we overcomplicate things. And that largely can be due to what we've been told self care is. And so it requires us to kind of do our own research and our own investigation to see, okay, what kind of self care is appropriate for me and what kind of self care is going to be sustainable for me too. Because another barrier I hear is time. I don't have time to put anything else on my plate, right? I have so many other things going on. You're just asking me to put another thing on my schedule that I already don't have time for. And so, again, going back to this idea that self care is about knowing what you need and giving yourself what you need to take care of yourself. And so, for any given person, self care is going to look different. And so, it's about what do you need and what's workable in your life in this season of your life, because we know that different seasons require different forms of self care. Our needs change from season to season in our lives. And so, us being attuned with what are my needs and being open-minded about what self-care can look like for us, and knowing that there's no rule book, there's no right or wrong. And so in my book, I'm really clear about helping people actually develop individualized self-care plans and going along with this idea that there's no one right way to do self-care. It's about what type of self-care is going to be sustainable for you and what type of self-care is going to meet your needs.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, like, what do you want in your life? What do you want to bring in your life? And it takes time to sit with yourself and have that quiet time to feel that. And if we're so busy, we don't tune into ourselves. And a lot of that, those wants and desires for ourselves comes from what are we passionate about? What were we passionate when we were a kid? We didn't have responsibilities, got to run outside and play or whatever. What were we
Yep.
passionate about? And do we allow ourselves to play?
Mm,
And tune into that child part of ourselves. I think that would be part of that self care too, of
yeah,
fully
that's
knowing yourself.
huge. That's huge. Yeah, allowing yourself to dream about what's possible for you in your life. A lot of times we find ourselves stuck in situations, maybe work situations or relationships that are unfulfilling. But a part of self care too is allowing yourself to dream and imagine what's possible for you in your life, and being flexible about how you can get to that end goal that you're envisioning for your life, and recognizing that it may seem far-fetched for you given where you are now, but it's not impossible. I think a lot of times we talk ourselves out of our dreams because we think that they're too big or they just can't possibly work out given our current circumstances. And so sometimes self-care is really about just allowing yourself to have a dream and a vision, and not cutting yourself off from dreaming.
And that you
Yes.
deserve that dream,
Yes. Yeah.
that to make
Hmm.
that goal.
Hmm.
So, one of the questions I ask everybody, because we have a theme, which is celebrating spirit of woman, united we are one. How do you see your workshop contributing to women working on that theme within themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes back to this idea that I talk about social self care a lot. We are all interconnected. None of us were made to do life alone. We are social beings, like the psychology research is very clear on that. And so self care helps us to show up for the communities that we care about, and that includes other women. And so when we take care of ourselves, we can be connected to other people and have healthy relationships with other women, because I know that some folks have been hurt in their relationships with women before by betrayal or other experiences. And so it's really about learning what you need and what your barriers are and what your boundaries are, and also what your desires are for your friendships, and then being able to go out and find like-minded women who you can unite with and who you can um, hold hand to hand and say, okay, this is my sister, and I'm really connected with her, and we're on this journey of called life together. And so self-care allows us to show up for those relationships, because when we our life is out of balance and we're just kind of focused on work, or we're just focused on home life, then relationships with other women can sometimes go on the back burner. And so self-care, and what I talk about with self-care is really about helping you to kind of find that balance again, so that one area of your life is not completely being neglected.
Right. And you mentioned the betrayal. There's also that, that fear of opening up to other women and being friends, of that whole competition that women and girls get
Yes.
into, compete
Yeah.
with each other, and to know that everybody has unique gifts, and we're not all the same, and so we can honor each other's gifts. And just because somebody else has a gift, or say you wrote a book, I wrote a book, I don't have to think, well, gee, my book isn't as valuable as Robin's book. Why would someone read my book? Well, we all have unique voices. So, and we all
Exactly.
contribute to the whole, and that unifies us, that we can all be in community together. And that's what Woman Wisdom is about, is coming to community, coming together and
Yeah.
celebrating our spirit.
Yeah, I love that. And something that it made me think about when you were just saying that is this it all starts with mindset, right? When we have an abundance mindset, then we can kind of recognize that there's space at the table for all of us, right? There all of our unique voices are needed in this world. I might, even if someone else wrote a book on self-care, the way that I talk about it or my message might not resonate with everyone. And so there's a need for other people's books out there to really be able to kind of speak to and reach people where they're at. And so there's always, I think, that abundance mindset is so necessary, but a lot of times the way our culture and our society, maybe sometimes our previous experiences have set us up to have more of a scarcity mindset where it's like, oh, there's only so much out there. And so I have to be in competition because there's only so many slots at the table. And so just recognizing that there's space and also seeing the value in what you bring and staying solid in that and knowing that your gift is just as valuable as the other woman's gift that you're looking at.
Right. That takes you to self-esteem too. And just
Mhm.
really, yeah, knowing yourself, trusting yourself, and if you feel that inside yourself, others will see that too.
Definitely.
What
Most
happens
definitely.
inside is what gets reflected out there. Well, another thing that you're going to be doing at the conference is being part of our racial equity panel.
Yep.
We're very excited about that. And I don't have the title in front of me, but it's about create heart-centered activism and what women can do, powerful women can do to create racial equity. And so we have quite a diverse panel. And one of the things that you do in your work is that you work in diversity and trauma. And
Mhm.
I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. So I really look at some of the cultural challenges that come into play when we're thinking about BIPOC individuals in particular healing from trauma. And so we know that BIPOC individuals experience racial trauma, they experience oppression, they experience systemic racism, but then they also are prone to experiencing trauma in relationships, trauma, from car accidents or trauma from natural disasters. And so there's kind of like sometimes this double experience where it's not just like individual personal experiences of trauma, but then these experiences happen in the larger context, in the larger society where there's oppression and there's racism and there's white supremacy. And so it's about helping, in my work, helping survivors kind of understand that it's not just about kind of healing the individual piece, but also looking at the way that the culture that we're living in has influenced your ability to experience healing from this trauma, and how can you heal acknowledging the context. Because if we don't acknowledge the context, then sometimes people feel like, well, what's wrong with me? I should just be able to get over this. Why am I stuck on this experience so much? But a lot of times it's the larger context. And so helping people to see the larger context, but then also really capitalizing on the unique cultural strengths that people bring into their experiences. And so when we capitalize on that, whether that's a spiritual practice, a religious practice, that can enrich the healing process. And so allowing people to show up as their full selves to heal from trauma, and really taking into account those cultural pieces and how they can really be an asset to people as they're healing, and also can propel them towards what we call post-traumatic growth. So being able to make meaning from experiencing trauma and actually thrive in your life in spite of having experienced trauma.
Right. Well, I'm thinking like, well, we all have trauma, no matter what our color is. But and it sounds like, but people of color, BIPOC people, it's like it's compounded because you're living in this world of white supremacy, of of uh, systemic
Hmm.
racism, and sometimes it's covert and overt. I mean,
Yeah.
it's that uh, it can be, I would think, overwhelming to also then deal with your trauma that is also intertwined with all those issues that diverse people have to face.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of, so I imagine you need to do a lot of unraveling of people's
Definitely.
stories.
Definitely. Yeah, really getting to the core of how these experiences have impacted you, but then also how the larger culture has impacted you as well, and how it's maybe created a barrier to your own healing, or maybe made you even more susceptible to experiencing trauma in the first place.
Mhm. So one of the questions that we have is, how especially after, Black Lives Matter and everything that happened this spring, a lot of Caucasian people are, how can we be effective allies for racial equity? What can we do? It feels very overwhelming. So how do you help people with that and dealing with, to become an effective ally?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about, if especially if you're a white person, noticing what spheres of influence you have, because just by virtue of being a white person in America, you have privilege, and so recognizing what your privilege is, what spheres of influence you have, and then being willing to leverage that privilege on behalf of people of color, whether that's kind of getting involved in a community organization that is fighting for social justice issues, or donating money, supporting Black-owned businesses or BIPOC-owned businesses, or whether that's utilizing your voice in your workplace, and really creating a safe space for BIPOC people to be able to show up and talk about their experiences in the workplace, and investigating your workplace practices if you're a business owner, and seeing like, do we really walk the talk when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity? What are our hiring practices like? If we're not, if our staff is not diverse here, if the people who work here are not diverse, why is that? And being curious about that. And it's not about making someone feel bad or feel guilty, but it's about again understanding where are the places where I have influence, because I think the issue with racism and white supremacy and social injustice is sometimes it can feel just so overwhelming, and you can feel like I'm just one person, what could I possibly
Mhm.
do to influence this larger system? And so I always encourage people to look at, where do you have influence? Because all of us have influence in somewhere, even if like you're a mom who is raising your children and that's your main job right now. How can you infuse social justice into the way that you raise your kids and the messages that you're teaching them and the values that you're instilling in them? So there's always a sphere of influence that we have. And if we think long enough and we think creatively enough and we have the courage to leverage a bit of our privilege and our influence, we can really kind of create ripple effects. It might not be a huge splash in the ocean, but every little piece create ripples, and it impacts other people's lives in small ways and sometimes in large ways.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about, connecting with your friends and talking about sharing ideas of, what are you doing? What are you thinking? And educating yourself too, looking at your
Mhm.
biases, looking at the thoughts in your mind as, whoa, where did that come from? Was that a racist thought? Even just questioning, was that a racist thought I said or somebody else said? Just taking a look at it and then choosing, looking at where you can, like you said, have an area of influence, lots of organizations in every city for social justice to take a look at where you're interested in. Maybe it's around food because
Yep.
there's a disparity around, food distribution or the access to food, and especially now with COVID and everything, the
Mhm.
health of the social justice and the prison system. I mean, there's so many
Yeah.
areas, and pick one that you think that you feel passionate about that, so we each do one thing because we can't do it
Mhm.
all.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And recognizing those limitations, right? I think that's the thing, is what we don't want is for people to just be kind of paralyzed because it just
Mm,
feels like too daunting of a task. So you, as you're saying, find one place to start, but and always start with investigation, right? And understanding like, where are my biases, what, and exploring them and investigating and being critical with those biases. But then letting that education that you're taking in, I know this summer a lot of people were reading books
mhm,
and really trying to understand this at a cognitive level and on an educational level, but we have to also go past just simply understanding, right? And simply sitting at home in our beds and reading about these issues, and really change happens when we actually take action, right? And it can be, again, small action, just in your home, community-based action, or even like, national or global action. But just to know that, everyone's role in this will look different. Everyone doesn't have to be on the front lines out, um, holding signs and really kind of being vocal in that way. But there's a space for everyone. And as
mhm.
long as you're leveraging your privilege and you're actually taking action, not just kind of staying at home and staying comfortable, but putting yourself outside of your comfort zone and doing something that will actually have impact in someone else's life, then that's important and that's valuable.
Yeah, and it makes me think, like, to talk to other people about it, like to share ideas, like, well, what are you doing? What
Yeah.
what is out there in my neighborhood, what we kind of live in a white area of Seattle. I mean,
Yep,
where can we have an impact? What can we
definitely.
do? What are you doing? What do you see other people doing? And
Yeah.
just speaking up when we see something that's wrong,
Mhm.
to have that courage so that if we are maybe backed by other people to support us, that, hey, I'm behind you. When you see something and you speak up, know that I'm there with you. So you're
Yeah,
not feeling alone. Because it is scary, to
it
confront
is.
somebody.
It is. It is.
And especially somebody you don't know, you just see something in public happening. And
Mhm,
that
mhm.
takes a brave, courageous person in a way, because some people just, there's overreactions to things. And so
There is, yeah.
we get into
Yeah.
fear with that. And how can we do that? How can we take care of ourselves? I know it's a self-care too thing, like how we can take care of ourselves and still feel comfortable to speak up and do the right thing.
Right. Yeah, and I love that connection too, because a lot of times one criticism that self-care gives, particularly for people who are like fighting for larger causes, social justice causes, where they're like, we don't have room for self-care because we need to be fighting for the community. But one thing I like to remind people of is that you won't have the energy or the creativity to be able to be thoughtful and strategic about how you fight for the communities that you're passionate about if you haven't taken care of yourself. And so that's how self care is really connected to community care. When we are well resourced ourselves, then we can engage in the community care and fight for the social justice causes that we're passionate about.
Well, we're so glad that you're part of Women Wisdom this year, and I know people will get a lot out of your workshop.
Yes.
So thank you so much. I would love you to give a last walk away from our interview today, what you want to leave with our listeners.
Yeah, I would just leave the fact that, self-care, there's not one way to do self-care. That's what I will leave you with. There's not one way to do self-care. So I encourage you to get curious, take some time during this holiday season to get still, and to tune in, turn your attention inward, and to really listen to your own inner wisdom and to trust that inner wisdom, and give yourself what you need, and not kind of feeling like it has to look any particular way, but really just having that flexibility and that freedom to take care of yourself in the way that best meets your needs.
And we may have more time this year to do that, since a lot of us are in solitude or
Yeah,
just with our partner or family. There's not the big parties. There's not, it's
exactly.
very different, which allows for that quiet time, which sometimes is uncomfortable
Yes.
to sit in.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
here's this, I think a lot of people have realized that over this last 9 months, that's an opportunity. It's been an opportunity to be with
Yep.
oneself.
Yep. I love that. Yeah. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And I want
Thank
people to
you.
know that you can go read more about Robyn at her website, robingobin.com. That's ROBYNGOBIN.com. Also, check out the Woman of Wisdom website for all the offerings at our conference. Just go to www.womenofwisdom.org. And we have special prices for seniors, for teens, for young women. We have an early bird price through January 18th, and also daily prices if you can't make it the whole weekend. But it's a real gift if you come the whole weekend. So thanks. I'll be interviewing more presenters every day now, and pretty soon, before we know it, it's going to be March 11th, and we'll be starting this conference.